A rich cultural display opening the 2024 Africa Prosperity Dialogue on the hills of Bidwasi in Ghana's eastern region. Delegates attending this year's summit are actors drawn from across the African continent and are expected to brainstorm on how to deliver prosperity to the African people. Key on this agenda is the need to accelerate the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement.
The theme for this year could not be more appropriate. Delivering prosperity in Africa, production, add value, and trade. And of course, the African Continental Free Trade Area is precisely the instrument to deliver upon this promise of an Africa that produces what it consumes. Over the last 3.5 years that the AFCFTA Secretariat has been in Ghana, we have recorded tremendous success in ensuring that the vision of our founding fathers does indeed become a reality. Trade under the AFCFTA has begun. We have a program that we initiated last year, which is designed and intended to see the realization of the trade that all of us want to see on the African continent. As we speak, we have developed the AFCFTA tariff book, which enables the private sector and economic operators across the African continent to determine with certainty the tariffs that apply to the products that they want to export. We also have the Rules of Origin Manual. For the very first time, as the African continent, we are able to apply rules of origin that are harmonized, that enable an exporter from Kenya to export to Malawi with a great deal of certainty about the market that they are exporting to. The private sector is, of course, an important part of the work that we are doing, and indeed a pillar of implementation of the AFCFTA. As the chairman said before me, it is not governments that trade, it is the private sector that trades. And that is why we have developed a private sector strategy, identifying sectors such as agriculture, the automotive sector, pharmaceuticals, transport and logistics, which combined create and establish a market of $130 billion for investing in the value chains that the Vice President of the African Development Bank alluded to earlier. We recognize, of course, that many challenges remain. That is why the partnerships that we have developed with the Africa Business Council, with the African Development Bank, with Afrexim Bank, to ensure that we mobilize the necessary resources so that this dream does indeed become a reality. Last year, as you may be aware, we signed an MOU with the United Bank of Africa, UBA, where they committed to mobilize up to $7 billion to invest in private sector, particularly small medium enterprises, to advance these very objectives of the AFCFTA of enabling small medium enterprises, the processing of and value addition of goods that are produced in Africa. Before that, we signed an MOU with the Equity Group, where they also committed to mobilize up to $7.5 billion in the processing of minerals on the African continent. Much needs to be done.
And that, for many experts, include tearing down the high cost of visas across the African continent. Ghana's President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo reveals that the country is already considering a policy of making the country a visa-free regime for all African people.
That for many of you, you had to acquire a visa to come to this event. Even though special arrangements for this conference reduced the visa acquisition fee by 50%, and you were thus able to receive your visa on arrival. The government of Ghana is committed to ensuring visa-free for all Africans traveling to our country, and the process has begun to get the policy implemented this year. These dialogues have to find ways to realize the commitments that have been made loudly and clearly for African governments to deepen their resolve in achieving the decisions reached in the compact. It must be representative of all sectors needed to carry Africa and ensure that the growth targets that are attained are sustainable, irrespective of future global challenges. These dialogues have to examine critically the responsibilities and expectations of the private sector and demand same of the public sector, and assess how both can work as partners to achieve the Africa we want. We must strengthen our resolve to work hand in hand with our governments in free and fair democratic systems of governance that promote safe and sound legal and institutional frameworks. Let us work to get the buy-in of the small trader, builder, farmer, and seamstress, and make them believe that having a single market can benefit them as well. As we delve into delivering prosperity in Africa, produce, add value, trade, the theme of this year's dialogues, let us embark on a journey that goes beyond rhetoric, transcending dialogue into actionable plans for transformative change.
Actors from across the African continent are converged here at the Africa Prosperity Dialogue 2024. The message is simple, that Africa needs to trade amongst itself and to boost production for development.
First, thank you very much. I am honored to be here on your channel. I believe Africa Prosperity Dialogue is really a cornerstone towards realizing the agenda of Africa 23 Development Agenda, the Africa we want. Because that's exactly what we really need. We are not talking really about alleviation poverty, but creating wealth. And that's exactly what we're trying to say as Africa Business Council, the voice of the private sector, and established by the heads of state, how we can create wealth among our African people and empower the African private sector. So the Africa Prosperity really Dialogue have come together with a very impressive logo and theme, which is produce, add value, and trade. Because all the issue about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is really about trading among ourselves. But what are we trading? Are we bringing containers from outside the continent to trade? Or what we have to do is to see how we trade a made in Africa product.
I see. But intra-Africa trade, we know, hasn't picked up as much. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which was ratified, is off to a slow start. We're running a guided trade initiative with just about 8 other African countries. It's not kicking off, is it?
So our intra-Africa trade does not exceed like 16% among ourselves, compared, for instance, to Asia, which has exceeded 60%. Europe, it's over 58% among themselves. So what are really the enablers to make us trade among ourselves, and what are we going to trade? So within this context, our founding vision of Africa Business Council is a competitive, borderless, innovative Africa for trade, investment, and industrialization.
I see.
So really the core issue, how to industrialize and add value to trade among ourselves. And this, we have a strategy, we call it the triad of empowerment, which is really based on 3 pillars. The first pillar is the private sector strengthening, including SMEs, women and youth. I need to empower our majority of the African private sector. Right. The small and medium enterprises, the women entrepreneurs, the cross-border traders, all those are, because the private sector is not homogeneous. How we do this? By building capacity, skills development, information, technology to empower our people. The second pillar really is about policy advocacy. Right. We need an enabling environment, and we are happy, thanks to the government of Ghana, thanks to His Excellency President Nana, for really being under his auspices, the Africa Prosperity Dialogue, because what we need is the political will. How we reduce corporate taxes, how we promote incentives for investment from African investment, how we have a special treatment for our African private sector. So one of the things we are working on now, and is already was recommendation of the African Union Private Sector Forum, adopted by the ministers of planning and finance, is to have at least 40% of all government procurement goes to African private sector, including SMEs, women and youth.
The idea is to have the free movement of people and also goods and services as well. But if we're to achieve that, we should see, as some experts are saying, a new wave of relaxation in the visa regimes and how it's becoming very difficult for people to move across the continent. What's your thoughts on this wave we're seeing, where a lot of the African countries are moving towards a visa-free regime just to allow more and more people to trade amongst the borders?
Actually, this is part of the advocacy that we're talking about, policy advocacy, the second pillar, which is really about how we move freely and how we have no borders. That's why our founding vision is borderless Africa. No borders, because all these borders is colonized after colonization. But what we really need to do that, we have to empower our people, because at some countries they will say it is because of security, it is because of many things. So we need to facilitate it first as a business visa. That's primary phases. Then we have so that business people can move freely and they can really promote our intra-Africa trade, because if we don't move, there will not be inter-Africa trade. Again, with doing this, we need incentives. And we need to go to the third pillar, which is about product development. Right. And product development is about made in Africa product that is quality, added value, standardized, homogeneous, quality, branding, designing, packaging, how we are going to have product development. So this again by linking science and technology with industrialization agenda. By supporting our industrial parks, business development centers, business incubators, how we promote our youth innovators. So it's really about the whole renaissance of industrialization.
Finance will be key in achieving that. I believe, the world is just returning from the World Economic Forum, where of course that has come up really strongly on how we should be supporting developing or emerging markets in these very trying and challenging times. Of course, issues about, financing has been a challenge for many African countries. How do we weather the storm and to try as much as possible to raking and mobilize lots of funding to support these agenda that we have?
So first, there should be financial inclusion. This again what we are really promoting, how to have financial inclusion and facilitate financial services, access to credit, access to finance, to bankable projects. To have a bankable projects, we need to really support how it's going to be bankable, how to support the projects, or whether it's a governments, it's a private sector. But above this, our financial institutions on the continent have to be empowered themselves to see how they can support and finance our mega projects. And on the same side, finance the SMEs, finance the corporates, finance all the African private sector. Again, for investment, we need an enabling environment and incentives for investment, because every investor wants to come to a country, they will need really to facilitate this, how we do it. So doing that, we need to have a mapping exercise of what are the business opportunities and investment opportunities on the continent, and what are the enabling environment. But again, for doing this, we need infrastructure, we need roads, we need railways, we need aviation, we need maritime, that will make it easy to move the products from one country to the other, because most of the time the whole transport and logistics is a big hindering towards the real movement of our products across the country. So again, this should be...
Yeah, and I was listening to your session, very interesting statistics that we're learning of in terms of how uneven the spread of wealth is across the African continent. It's intriguing to know that with almost over 1,000 SMEs across the African continent, you have just a few of these African companies making over $1 million US, and majority of them are in the southern parts of Africa, and then the rest spread across
Nigeria and other parts of West Africa. How troubling is this to you as the Africa Business Council that you're on the lookout for an even spread of resources across the continent?
So this is very important because under Africa Business Council, first our membership is including the REX Business Councils, Chambers of Commerce, so COMESA Business Council, SADC Business Council, West Africa Chambers of Commerce, FOASI is our member, East Africa Chamber of Commerce, Pan-African Manufacturer Association, all the regional and the continental sectorial are part of the Africa Business Council.
Right.
Aligning our efforts, what we do is that we need to see how the private sector come together and have common agendas. That's why we have 22 clusters that speaks to trade, to investment, to animal wealth and poultry and fishery, to energy, to infrastructure, to fashion industry, creative industries, energy, fashion industry. So all those is, each cluster is chaired by a special private sector entity that we bring all the members. And even we have the SMEs development cluster. That's why we're talking about SMEs.
Yes.
So, but again, the SMEs are not all homogeneous. The fashion is one thing, energy is a garment, textile, the mining industry. We have a mineral development sector, which is really working to see how we beneficiate, how we add value to our minerals, how we cut and polish our own minerals, our own gemstones, our own, if we see about the rare minerals now, or green minerals, we see, for instance, lithium.
Yeah.
By 2030, we would need 200 million vehicles, electrical vehicles, who are manufacturing the batteries. We have lithium, so we have to invest within the electrical batteries within the continent to support those manufacturing, or else if we export all the time our commodities and import it again,
it will be challenging.
Very
and
challenging.
Speaking about lithium, Ghana has also, discovered lithium in commercial quantities. We're hoping that will become the hub, looking at, the activities going on between the government of Ghana and Atlantic Lithium. You've seen other countries, develop just out of these green
DRC.
minerals. What lessons should we be picking from them, and how should Ghana be approaching, this discovery of lithium in our country?
So that is the whole issue why we are making this mapping exercise, to see what is existing on the continent and our resources, how we make sure that we add value to our own resources by our African expertise, and make sure that what we really produce, we need to feed all our African continent and then also go to international market after adding value.
Right.
So this also for agriculture. Yeah. We saw that what happened with the crisis outside the continent, we have shortage of food.
Yeah.
We are importing more than $50 billion per year food for the continent, while we have 65% arable land. And we can use it for agriculture.
Right.
We need coordination. We need to see how we come together. We commit ourselves, political will to empower our African private sector, coordination among all our sectors and the private sector. So with this, I believe that we need to push for the political will. Everybody talks about private sector, but we need to see what incentives they put for the private sector, and also to know what is industrialized on the continent.
Right.
Like I mentioned in this, for instance, there is medical consumer supplies. In Egypt, we have 400 factories of medical consumer supplies, yet we still import from outside the continent. Again, all the things that is manufactured on the continent, we need to bring it from the continent. Whatever on the African side cannot be brought from outside.
The Secretary General of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area says we're making progress in his estimation when it comes to this trading framework. Do you share the same assertion that indeed we are making progress with the framework?
Yes, we have already leaped ahead several phases. So there is now the protocol for women use, there is protocol for digital trade. There is the movement is going on. We need to push it further, and we need the political will, as I said, to accelerate the process. But again, who is going to implement it? The private sector. So we need to have the private sector really empowered and have a lead and make sure that we are going parallel together to realize the ACFTA.
Next week, we're expecting ministers within the Council of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area to meet here in Accra. What will be the expectation from the private sector, the business community? Because you had the Africa Business Council, you have a sense of what the feeling and the aspirations of the business community. What are we looking forward to as those engagements commence?
So, as I mentioned, the things that we are really looking from the ministers and decision makers is to see how to really implement this government procurement policy for our at least 40% of government procurement goes to African private sector, including SMEs, women and youth, to see how they have this enabling environment, the incentives for investment for the Africa, to really push for the infrastructure, push for the movement of goods and space, and to accelerate really the implementation of ACFTA, all the negotiations. So we already started the trading under ACFTA since 2020, but we need to really accelerate this and put our heads together, like our African proverb, which always say, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, we go together.
You go together, indeed, and that brings to mind what you do at the Africa Business Council and how, what plans, policies you're putting in place to support SMEs across the African continent. Are there some programs you're running aside, the Africa Prosperity Dialogue that your council is running?
Yes, that's fantastic, because actually this is the core aim of Africa Business Council. We have several events that we are working on that were really about the Africa Mineral Development Summit that will take place at the end of the year, the African Congress for Women in Women Entrepreneurs, the African Congress for Science, Technology, Innovation and Industrialization, to link science and technology with industrialization, and we make sure that we operationalize those clusters. Some countries have a lot of cattle, but they are porting milk, for instance. How can this happen? Or they are really sending their leather and they are not value adding. So how to promote this leather industry under one of the sector, how to promote our fashion industry. And one of the things also, we want to set up training centers for cutting and polishing our own stones. I mean, this stone from Madagascar.
Oh, wow, amazing.
But you will see that a lot of our gemstones are cut and polished outside the continent. We need to set up, and this is one of the projects we're trying to do, training centers for cutting and polishing the gemstones, so we are able to send it directly to the international market without having, like exactly in agriculture. One of the projects of African Union is the CAPS, which is the Common Agro-Industrial Parks, which Africa Council sits on the steering committee. Again, regional, how we make industrial parks for agro-processing to have our food processed, instead of sending macadamia to Vietnam to be roasted there and sent again. We really working to see how we have the skill development. The technology is very important to add value to the products, and to see how we have this technology in the continent. Either we have transfer of technology or buy the technology or empower our African people to have this technology.
The African Development Bank says it is worried that although we're making strides in raising revenue and building prosperity on the African continent, there seems to be a challenge. And the challenge is that there is still illicit flow of finance out of the African continent. How worried is the African Business Council about this development as well?
We have a sector, a cluster for financial services and financial inclusion that really works on this sector to see how the financial sector is really organized and how we have access to finance, because many of the things happen that at least now when you want payment, the payment around the continent is not easy. So the Afri-Exim has put this payment system so that we are able to promote, to trade among ourselves with our local currencies, because this again is very important. So these initiatives should be really used by the private sector, supported by the governments and the political leaders, and making it awareness for all the African people.
Governance. Any brief comments on what's been happening?
Governance is a cornerstone for any business, any political leadership, and that's why again we need to see how we have good governance on the continent, but not that also. We need to change our mindset, because all the time I always say, and that's why I'm here happy with the Africa Prosperity Dialogue, because what we see from our African leaders when they say we need Africa free from hunger, free from disease, free from illiteracy, free from poverty. I always say, the private sector doesn't want Africa free from hunger, but well nourished, not free from disease but healthy, not free from poverty but wealthy, not free from illiteracy but well educated. And this is the Africa we want.
All right. Alexa Samwo, thank you for talking to JoyNews. The Africa Prosperity Dialogues 2024 is underway. Your session just wrapped up, and a very interesting dialogue it has been on cocoa. This is a cash crop that Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire have used or traded over the years, but the argument is being made that we're not deriving the benefits as it should. How worried are you at the Cocoa Initiative on this development?
First of all, I will not say we haven't got any benefits. If you look, today we can say Ghana is cocoa, same like Cote d'Ivoire. So we had benefits, but if we look at the bigger scale, indeed, we are not getting what we are supposed to do, which is kind of normal if we produce only raw material and we export. And today, with the vision of the head of state of Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, so the President Nana Akufo here in Ghana, to come together was to really shift the paradigm. So instead of just producing, is to kind of join force to influence the market, but also to start bringing programs and projects that will transform the sector. So it's about more processing in country. It's about processing so that we can create more value, and creating value will then help us bringing more back to the farmer. So we have to close the gap that has been happening for so many years, where we have been seen as just a volume of the cocoa, low quality productions, but to a high quality cocoa, to also high value back to farmer. And I think that's the key priorities. And this is part of the partnership both countries are having.
Right. I'm looking at a very instructive comment that you made about the market share under $30 million US, and Africa is just hovering around 7% of the market share. Yeah. How do we leverage and add more value to this cash crop and to benefit more from the market?
So it's not even market share. So it's 130 billion value of the cocoa sector. So from the cocoa beans, export, processing to the chocolate, all together it's 130 billion revenue generated by the sector, which we are very small. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of factual, simply because we have not processing till the end product. Even today, we are a key grinding company, the country, but we are not processing till the end product. And chocolate needs cocoa and butter. So most of these key things are being now processed a little bit more here, but this is the part where there are more value. So it's normal that we represent so small, and this is exactly the work we are doing by promoting through this dialogue today, through the African Union, to really promote more and more key values that will come out of cocoa. This is the only way that we shift from this 7-10% to much higher percentage.
And that's why many laud the initiative that your outfit is running, except to say that the question is being asked as to what exactly you're doing at the outfit to change this narrative and to try and correct the fact that Africa is not benefiting that much from the cocoa sector.
So there is much we have to do. So first thing, we have to realize that we need to consume what we produce. I think that's the first thing. We are not eating chocolate. You don't.
It's for the European market, I guess.
Well, so myself, I consider that as a privilege, but I will probably eat a year maximum 1 kilo. While same age in Europe, let's say Germany, it's around 9 kilo a year. So there is a massive gap. So then the question for us is not doing and eating more chocolates. Yes, we can eat some chocolate. What we need to reflect on, and this is the work we are trying to do by bringing research and exchange between the countries and bringing startups and partners, this is to bring value in processing of derivative product out of cocoa. As I mentioned earlier in my speech, people use cocoa pods to do potash, right? To do fertilizer. There are some markets in Europe for cosmetic out of cocoa. There are cocoa juice. There are alcohol made out of cocoa. So these are the things that we are, through research, getting the right framework to build that into policy and promote private sector to invest.
Right.
And when I say private sector, I'm talking about African private sector, to invest in country and to promote also the consumption of this product. This is how we are going to change the paradigm. So it's a long process because this is not a product that is part of our consumption habit. So there is a transformation, but we are building and we are kind of incubator for this process as initiatives and bringing that back into our country and regulatory.
What do we bring in competition? You were raising that fact earlier, the fact that at some point, you know, it's a Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire rivalry over who gets to lead the ranking in terms of being the highest producer of the cash crop. And we have become flippant on promoting the produce itself and adding or perhaps gaining more value from the market. Do you feel that the competition between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire could be a bit more healthier in terms of production?
The competition today is healthier. So I can tell you it's healthier because the two countries are very clear what's the capacity of production. We have to renovate the farms, we have to support farmers to rejuvenate the farms, and we exchange data to how to do it. And Cote d'Ivoire produced 2.2 million, Ghana produced almost close to 1 million ton. So there is a massive difference. I think what we should avoid, and I think that's good to have the two countries together, is to have a competition of volume. Because clearly the more cocoa you put into the market,
The more return.
the less return you have because the price is becoming lower.
Right.
So I think that's the kind of situation. But today we have a very good market simply because we have the situation where the demand now is matching with the supply. And this is creating a very good demand, which is also helping us investing back further into farms.
You're asking that the world market considers changing the price value of cocoa and that the cost should be covering production as well.
It's not the market, it's us.
Okay.
So we are
what's the explanation
producing,
to that? Yes.
we need to put, and we have put already in policy, the value of our cocoa.
Right.
Anyone who is not willing to pay it.
What's the selling
So the
price
living
then?
income
Yes. Right.
differential
Differentials.
price, for example, is a system mechanism which defines a floor price, which is based on cost of production. So 4 years after, we have to review because the value has changed. There's an inflation in our countries, post-COVID, many issues, compliance because of certain regulations. So these are the things that we are going to put now into numbers. But today, the market price we have is very close to this, what represents all this compliance. And for us, this is the future fight, which is the value of the cocoa. And no one will tell us, we are going to tell because we know the cost. And our policy need to match it, and reflection need to make on which sanctions or anyhow whoever who doesn't follow this.
Final two questions. The last leg on smuggling of cocoa. It's derailing the efforts that Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire have been making in terms of production and keeping the price on the market stable. How do we tackle this effectively? And are you equally worried that this is becoming a challenge for both Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire?
I think it's not so a challenge because both countries are talking, are exchanging data. So recently in one of my board meetings, we were very clear. Both countries have exchanges, and Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana have presented some of the actions, joint effort at border. But the issue is even less at the border between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. Both countries are facing smuggling outside the country through other countries. So,
not between Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. Right.
Between Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, anyway, when a farmer has a fit in both countries, you can't stop him to buy wherever he feels right. But that one is not where the problem is. The problem is trucks coming to Ghana and vice versa. This is less, and it is becoming less because the way we have set the price in both countries, the gaps is so close that doesn't allow anyone to have benefit by smuggling cocoa.
So people are rather moving in.
Well, I'm not saying they're rather moving, but there are others that are interesting to go and look where there are no regulations. That's how it works. But for us, we are not so worried because the key market for the African countries are Europe. And Europe has put some rules where today Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana have implemented traceability system, right? Which means that if you go and buy your cocoa elsewhere, well, you have to probably fraud for the data to prove where your product is coming from. So for us, this situation will probably benefit us because then only if you buy from Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana very clearly with the full traceability that prove that you are not buying from certain areas and ABCD, then will be good. So
And
people
that even reminds me about the EU policy. I guess
Yes.
that's what you're referring to.
That's what I'm referring to, yes.
Would it not rather impoverish the average farmer? Or,
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all, because then cocoa, as I said, the value for this cocoa will be much more clearer because it will be traceable. We will know where it's coming from. There are costs associated to it, and anyone who wants to buy this cocoa will have to pay to this price. And this is, for me, that's probably, in fact, it's not empowering, but it's instead increasing revenue back to farmer because they will be part of a framework that is very clear and transparent. But that also will, for us as country, will maintain the system where anyone who wants to smuggle the cocoa is most probably for a certain other market, but for the biggest market, at some point, cocoa version 2 will be cocoa that is traceable, cocoa that is well covered, that is not being produced in deforested area, etc., etc. So, in fact, I see it as an opportunity for us. It's an opportunity, and the two countries have taken the effort. Ghana Cocoa Board here in Ghana has fully implemented the process and testing the pilot for traceability. And this one you can talk more to the Cocoa Board, but you will see that there is so much that has been done. And all these things cost money. Who is going to pay for it? This is why we said this cocoa will have a different value that will be much more transparent than just us saying, please pay more.
Ghana, we'll be wrapping up shortly. Ghana is, of course, facing some economic challenges. Revenue from cocoa is also being strained as well. At the same time, we're seeing farmers asking for some subvention on fertilizers and all of that. But government says, well, we're running an austerity plan with the IMF, so these things would have to hold on a bit. In the wake of these economic challenges, what recommendation do you have in terms of how countries and governments can help these cocoa farmers to tackle
It's difficult for me to talk on what Ghana will do strategically, but what I could say is that today we reach a market level that is now advantage. So if we run properly, as you know, we sell forward. So the cocoa we are selling will be for the next year crop. But that process in the current price market will enable us to cover and to carry on good investment that we can bring back to the farmer. So for that perspective, I'm not so worried. Instead, I think farmers need to be motivated because the demand is there. The price, higher price we have been fighting for is there. And only what is needed is to get cocoa. And I think that's where we are.
Your final message to Ghanaians?
To Ghanaians, I think we need to keep saying Ghana is cocoa. Cocoa is bringing value. And there are a lot of efforts made by the government. We all have seen the economic difficulties that we went through. But we have been fighting for a higher price for cocoa. Today we are there. And we need to make sure that the right investment is being made, the farmer gets rewarded, and I'm very pleased to see where we are, and I'm sure this is bringing a lot of opportunity for us to invest back into farms.
Blessed Sogah reporting for JoyNews, Peduase Presidential Lodge, Eastern Region.